All right, students of the LOF, and welcome to lesson 3-3. Let's get started first by looking at our learning targets for the day. So we're going to be focusing on I can add and subtract numbers up to 1,000 using the strategy partial sums. So the strategy we're going to be using today, the name of it is called partial sums. And the second learning target today is I can tell if my answer makes sense by estimating. So we're going to be doing those two things today. We're going to be estimating to see if our answer makes sense, and we're going to be adding or subtracting. Actually, we're going to focus on adding today using the strategy called partial sums. So let's get to work. So I've included over here on this side a series of steps that we're going to follow. We're going to follow them in order, and these steps are going to help us solve these problems correctly. So I'm on page 69. This actually is solved for you in the book, but I'm going to go ahead and solve it and show you how we got to that example. So looking at my steps, I can see here that my first step, in order to estimate, I need to round each number to close but easy to add mentally. So I'm looking for numbers that are close to 329 and close to 418, but that are numbers that I can add in my head pretty easily. So I'm thinking, and I look at 329, and I think I could round that to 330, and I could round 418 to 420. Notice I rewrite my estimate here. So now in my head I'm going to add 42 and 33. So I can see 2 plus 3 is 5, and then 4 hundreds plus 3 hundreds is 700. So I've got 7 hundreds, and then 30 plus 20 is 50. See, now my purpose of doing this is we're going to use estimating to tell if our answer makes sense. So we know our answer needs to be about 750. So now we're going to solve our problem and see if we get close to our estimate. So we have done step one. We've rounded each number. We have then added those rounded numbers. Now we have to stack it. And what I mean by stack it is we're going to take this number model and we're going to write it in a different way. When I say stack it, we're going to write the ones on top of the ones. We're going to make the tens are make sure the tens are lined up and make sure that the hundreds are lined up. So I'm going to first write my first number, 329. And when I mean stack it, I'm going to make sure that this 4 starts right here under this 3 so that the hundreds are lined up, 418. So if we were to quickly look at this, we could see that the ones, the tens, and the hundreds are all lined up. So that's called stacking it. When you're finished stacking it, it'll look like this. You may have seen this before. So I've stacked it. Now this next part of our problem says I'm going to add the hundreds only. So I'm going to add the hundreds only. So this is where I have to look and I have to think and do some mental math in my head. So I'm going to look at 3 and the 4 because I'm looking at my hundreds place. So this 3 here, since it's in the hundreds place, doesn't really represent 3. It actually represents 300. So and this 4 here actually represents 400. So I'm going to write that number model here. And I'm going to add 300 plus 400. And 300 plus 400 equals 700. So I have added the hundreds only, and I wrote it below like it says here. So this is where I wrote it below. My next step says to add the tens only. So sometimes what I like to do in the problem is I like to cross out like I've added the hundreds. So I'm just going to put one quick line through those so I know I've added those. And now I'm going to focus in on these tens. So I can see the numbers 2 and 1, but because they're in the tens place, the value is not 2. The value of this 2 is actually 20. So I'm going to do 20. And the value of this 1, because it's in the tens place, is 10. So you can actually see here, you can almost imagine if we took this 9 and that 8 and made them zeros. And that's where we get these numbers from. So now we're going to do 20 plus 10. Take a moment to think. Now check your answer with me. 20 plus 10 is 30. And again, if we look down here at my steps, I followed my steps. I added the tens only, and I wrote it below. So now my next step says to add the ones only. And this is where it gets a little bit easier. We look at our ones. We see that we have 9 and 8 left. So I'm going to do 9 plus 8. Now I'm thinking in my head, 9 plus 8. Now I know that is 17. So we have done step 5 and we've done step 6. Now it says add all the partial sums. And this is where I want you to look. The partial sums are right here. Each one of these is a partial sum. And a partial sum is just a sum, remember, is the answer to any addition problem. And if we look in the word partial, it says part. So it just means that it's one part of the whole sum of our original problem up here. So it says to add all of the partial sums together. So when I'm going to add now, I'm going to look at 700 plus 30 plus 17. Well, I can see that I could add the 7 to these two zeros, and I'm going to get 7. 3 and 1 added together is 4. And 700. So I've got 747. So I'm going to write my final answer up here, 747. And I actually have one last step that I need to do first. I'm going to look here and see, does 747 make sense with my estimate? And I can see that that's only 3 away. So my estimate makes sense to me. And I can move on to my next problem. All right, class, we're going to move on to problem 1. And remember, these problems are on page 69. Take a moment, look at the stop sign. I want you right now to stop, and I want you to solve problem 1. Remember, the steps are here for you to use to help you. And when you're done, press play and check your work. All right, so now it's time to check our work. So let's go through each one of these steps. First, it says round each number to close but easy to add numbers mentally. So this is where your answer might be a little bit different than mine based on how you estimate it. But I'm thinking I can round 143 to 150. That's a close to an easy number for me to add. And I can round 28 to 30. So 150 plus 30, I can count by tens, 150, 160, 170, 180. So I know my answer needs to be about 180. So I have got step 1 done and step 2. Now I need to stack it. So I'm going to take some time. I'm going to stack my number. I've got 143 plus 28. Now I've got to make sure that 8 goes in the ones and that 2 goes in the tens. It's really important that we do that. We don't want to be adding ones with tens or tens with ones and vice versa. So we've got to add our addition symbol. I have the stack it done. Next step, it says add the hundreds only. Check this problem out. You may have run into this as well. There is only 100. There are no hundreds in 28. So we have 100 plus 0. Now it says right below, so we're going to write it below, which equals 100. Step 4 is done. Now we need to move on to step 5. Add the tens only. So now we're going to look at this column. I've got 4 tens and 2 tens, and 4 tens has a value of 40, and 2 tens has a value of 20. 40 plus 20 equals 60. Now I can check off, I added the tens. Now I'm moving to adding the ones, and I've got 3 and 8 left. 3 plus 8. So I've got 8, 9, 10, 11. I can check off. I've got the ones added. Now it says add all the partial sums. And remember, the partial sums are each one of these numbers here. They're part of the total sum of 143 plus 28. So now we have to add all those together. So I know that 100 plus 60 is 160. 160 plus 11, I'd go up by 110 to 170, and I could add that 1 on, so it'd be 171. I'm going to rewrite my answer up here at the top, 171. And now I'm going to check and see if my answer makes sense. So 171, I'm thinking in my mind, is close to 180. 180 is a little bit bigger, but that might be because I rounded 143 up to 150 when I probably should have added it. I'll check that out. I made a mistake. We make mistakes all the time. I'm going to fix that. So if you notice, I didn't round 143 properly. So 143 should actually be 140. So it should be 140 plus 30, which would equal 170. And that estimate is very close to my exact answer. At this point, I want you to move on and solve the problems on page 69. Solve problems 2 and 3. They're at the bottom. You see them here. When you're done solving them, please submit these 2 problems in Seesaw. You can submit the whole page if you want. When you're done submitting in Seesaw, then continue your work with the procedure for our flipped lessons that's on the board. Just as a little bit of a reminder here, or remember, that you can rewind this video to look back at the steps that I gave you on those previous problems to make sure that you do everything for problems 2 and 3, and I think that would be a really great idea. So at this is the conclusion of your video. If you need to go back to use those steps, please do so.